The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit into the cracked timbers of the old shed and a voice that moaned through the gaps where boards had surrendered to time. Snow, fine as dust, sifted down from the collapsed roof, a slow, silent burial. Inside that ruin, curled in a nest of rotting hay and forgotten burlap, was a child. She was impossibly small, a bundle of rags that scarcely disturbed the settled decay. One hand, blue and frail, clutched the strap of a worn leather satchel pressed tight against her chest, as if it were the last warmth in the world. Her breathing was a shallow whisper, each exhalation a tiny ghost in the freezing air. She was not sleeping. She was ceasing. Life was leaking out of her, a slow, quiet surrender to the terrible cold and the gnawing emptiness in her belly. She did not dream of rescue. She did not hope for a gentle hand. Hope was a luxury that had been burned out of her long ago, leaving only the hard, cold fact of survival, a fact that was now failing. This was a place of endings, and 100 yards away, a man who believed his own life had already ended was about to walk into the beginning of his. He found her by accident, a cruel twist of fate in a world he had long since abandoned. He was checking the north fence line, a task he hated, a reminder of a life he no longer cared to maintain. The wind was a razor, slicing through his worn wool coat, and the snow was getting thicker, threatening to strand him. He was thinking of the whiskey bottle on his table, of the cold hearth, of the silence that would greet him. He was thinking of nothing and everything. The weight of his past was a physical burden, settled deep in his bones. He saw the collapsed roof of the old line shack, a structure he had not bothered with in a decade. A flicker of movement, or maybe just a trick of the swirling snow, caught his eye. A fox, he reckoned, or a coyote, driven down from the high country by the storm. He carried a rifle, more out of habit than need, and he raised it slightly, his eyes narrowing against the white glare. He was a man who moved with a weary, practiced economy, his body remembering skills his soul had tried to forget. He approached the ruin cautiously, the snow crunching under his heavy boots. The silence here was different. It was not the empty silence of his cabin, but a deep, waiting stillness. He peered through a gap in the wall. He saw the pile of rags. He saw the impossible tangle of dark hair dusted with white. He saw the shape of a human being where no human being should be. His first thought was not pity. It was annoyance, a vagrant, a drifter who had crawled into his property to die and make a mess of his day. He was a hard man, made harder by loss, and the world had taught him that compassion was a fool's game. He almost turned away. He almost left the problem to the snow and the cold, to let nature finish its grim work. But something held him. A memory, thin as smoke, of another small form, another tangle of dark hair, a ghost from a grave he could never stop digging in his own mind. He swore under his breath, a harsh, grating sound. He lowered the rifle and pushed his way through the sagging doorframe. The cold inside the shack was even more profound, a dead, breathless cold that clung to everything. He knelt. He reached out a gloved hand, hesitant, and touched the small shoulder. There was no response. He brushed the snow from her hair, his movement suddenly clumsy, uncertain. He saw the pale, hollowed-out face, the blue-tinged lips, the dark lashes stark against translucent skin. 5 years old? Maybe 6. No coat. The annoyance inside him shattered. It broke apart, and in its place, something terrible and vast and hollow opened up. It was a feeling he had not allowed himself to feel in a very, very long time. It was the echo of grief, but it was also something else, something fierce and sharp. He saw the satchel clutched to her chest. He saw the raw, scraped knuckles of the hand holding it. She had fought to keep it, fought for it until the very end. He dropped the rifle in the snow. He dropped the lantern he had not yet lit. He gathered the small, stiff form into his arms. She weighed nothing. A bird, a shadow. He turned and carried her out into the storm, his own cold forgotten, his own emptiness filled with a sudden, terrifying purpose. He did not know who she was. He did not know how she had come to be in this God-forsaken place. He only knew that she was dying, and he was not going to let that happen. Not again. Before we follow him back into the lonely warmth of his cabin, before the fire is lit and the questions begin to form, I want to take just a brief moment. These stories, these journeys into the heart of what it means to be human, are only possible because you are here to witness them. If you find yourself moved by this man's unexpected choice, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to the channel. And I would love to know where you are watching from tonight. Please leave a comment below with your city or country. Knowing that these stories are reaching hearts in so many different places around the world is a profound encouragement. Thank you, truly, for being here with me. Now let's step back into that biting wind and follow this broken man as he carries a flicker of life back toward a home that had long forgotten what it meant to hold it. The walk back to the main house was a battle against the wind. It howled in his ears, trying to rip the small bundle from his arms, throwing sheets of snow into his face until he was blind. He bowed his head, shielding her with his own body, his steps sure and steady over the ground he knew better than his own reflection. The child remained limp, a dead weight that felt heavier with every yard. He could not feel her breath against his neck, could not detect any sign of life beyond the faint, residual warmth that was fading with every passing second. A terrible urgency seized him. He broke into a stumbling run, his lungs burning, his legs aching. The house loomed out of the white chaos, a dark, uninviting shape against the gray sky. It was not a home. It was a shelter, a place where he stored his grief and his bitterness. The windows were dark eyes, vacant and staring. He shouldered the heavy oak door open and stumbled inside, kicking it shut against the storm. The silence that greeted him was thick with dust and disuse. The air was frigid, only a few degrees warmer than the world outside. A fine layer of grime covered every surface. In the main room, a stone fireplace stood cold and black, a gaping mouth filled with old ashes. A table, 2 chairs, a cupboard, all of it spoke of a life pared down to its barest, most miserable essentials. He did not hesitate. He carried the child straight to the fireplace and laid her gently on the threadbare rug before the hearth. Her body was so stiff. He worked quickly, his hands, which had grown clumsy with disuse, now moving with a strange, rediscovered grace. He stripped off his gloves and felt her neck for a pulse. It was there, faint, thready, a desperate little bird fluttering in a cage of ice. Relief, sharp and painful, shot through him. He had not realized he had been holding his breath. He let it out in a ragged sigh. She was alive. For now. He worked with a singular focus that pushed aside the years of apathy. He piled kindling into the fireplace, his hands trembling slightly. He struck a match, the flare of it unnaturally bright in the gloom. The flame caught, licking at the dry wood, and a small, hopeful crackle echoed in the silent room. He added larger logs, coaxing the fire, feeding it, urging it to life as if it were the child herself. As the first real warmth began to push back the chill, he turned his attention back to her. Her clothes were thin cotton, torn and filthy, and soaked through. He had to get her out of them. He fumbled with the tiny buttons on her dress, his thick, calloused fingers struggling. It felt like a violation, an intrusion, but he knew it was necessary. He finally managed to peel away the wet, cold layers. Her skin was a pale mottled blue, and she was covered in a road map of bruises and scrapes. Her arms and legs were like sticks. He could count every rib. A wave of cold fury washed over him, so intense it made him dizzy. Who could do this to a child? Who could leave her to die in the snow? He found a clean horse blanket in a nearby chest, one he had not used since his wife. Since before. It still smelled faintly of cedar and her. The memory was a knife twist, but he pushed it down. He wrapped the child tightly in the thick wool, covering everything but her small, pale face. He propped her head up with a folded sack. Then he went to the kitchen pump and worked the handle until water, rusty at first, then clear and cold, gushed out. He heated a pan on the fire, testing the water with his finger until it was warm, not hot. He found a clean rag. He returned to her side and began to gently, carefully, wash the grime from her face and hands. Her skin was so fragile, like paper. He cleaned a long, shallow cut on her forehead. He cleaned the dirt from beneath her fingernails. Each touch was a prayer. Each stroke of the cloth was an apology for the cruelty of the world. He was not a gentle man. He had forgotten how to be. But he was trying. He was remembering. He saw the satchel lying where it had fallen beside her. He had almost forgotten it. He picked it up. It was cheap leather, scuffed and worn, but the buckle was sturdy. He hesitated, feeling like a thief. But he knew he had to look. He had to know who she was, what she was running from. He unfastened the buckle. Inside, there was no food, no money, no child's toy. There was only a single object, a thick, leather-bound ledger. He opened it. The pages were filled with columns of names and numbers, written in a neat, precise hand. He did not understand what they meant, but he understood the care with which they had been recorded. This was not a diary. It was a record. It was evidence. And it was the reason she was nearly dead in his barn. He closed the ledger and placed it on the mantelpiece, high and out of sight. That was a problem for later. The only problem that mattered right now was the tiny, fragile life wrapped in a blanket by his fire. He spent the next hour watching her, feeding the fire, making sure the warmth seeped deep into her bones. He brewed a thin broth from the last of his salted meat and a few withered vegetables. The smell filled the cabin, a scent of home that felt alien and strange. He waited. He watched the slow, almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest. He watched the color slowly, painstakingly, begin to return to her cheeks, changing from a deathly blue-white to a pale, feverish pink. And then her eyes opened. They were a deep, dark brown, and they were filled with a terror so profound it struck him dumb. Her gaze darted around the unfamiliar room, taking in the fire, the rough-hewn walls, and finally, him. The moment her eyes locked on his, she flinched. A small animal sound of fear escaped her throat. She tried to scramble away, to push herself backward, but she was too weak. The blanket fell away, and she curled into a tight ball, her thin arms wrapped around her head as if expecting a blow. The sight broke something inside him. All his hard edges, all his carefully constructed walls of bitterness, they just crumbled into dust. He did not move. He did not speak. He made himself smaller, sinking back on his heels away from her. He kept his hands open and visible, resting them on his knees. He had dealt with spooked horses, with cornered animals. He knew the language of fear. You did not rush it. You gave it space. You showed it you were not a threat. "Easy now," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper he did not recognize as his own. "Easy. Nobody's going to hurt you here." She did not uncurl. She only trembled, her small body shaking violently. He stayed like that for a long time, silent, still, just letting her see him, letting her feel the warmth of the fire, letting the quiet of the room settle around them. The storm raged outside, a distant, muffled fury, but inside there was only the crackle of the flames and the sound of their breathing. He thought of the broth. He reached for the bowl slowly, never taking his eyes off her. He held it out, not toward her, but placing it on the floor a few feet away from her, between them. "You must be hungry," he said, his voice still that quiet rumble. "It ain't much, but it's warm." He retreated again, giving her space. For a long time, she did nothing. She just watched him, her dark eyes wide and wary over the top of her knees. He could see the struggle in them, the desperate gnawing hunger warring with the deep, ingrained fear. Hunger was a powerful thing. But for this child, fear was clearly a more familiar companion. Slowly, tentatively, she lowered her arms. Her gaze flickered from his face to the steaming bowl and back again. He could smell it, the simple, savory scent of meat and salt. For a child who had known nothing but cold and emptiness, it must have been an unbearable temptation. She crawled forward. It was a painful, hesitant movement, like a wounded fawn. She reached the bowl and stopped, her small hand hovering over it. She looked at him one last time, a question in her eyes. "Is this a trick?" He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. That was all it took. She grabbed the bowl with both hands and brought it to her lips. She did not use the spoon he had left beside it. She drank the broth in desperate, gulping swallows, her whole body shaking with the effort. Some of it spilled down her chin, but she did not seem to notice. She made small guttural sounds, the noises of a creature starved beyond all civility. When the bowl was empty, she did not put it down. She clung to it, her small fingers tracing the inside, trying to get every last drop. And then the tears came. They were not loud, dramatic sobs. They were silent, wrenching tears that streamed down her dirty cheeks, dripping into the empty bowl. It was a grief too deep for sound. The warmth and the food had not just filled her stomach. They had broken the dam that held back all the terror and the pain. She cried for her hunger, for her cold, for whatever terrible journey had brought her to his door. The man sat and watched, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He did not know what to do. He had no words of comfort. The part of him that knew those words had died a long time ago. So he just sat there, a silent, helpless witness to her sorrow. He just let her cry. He let her empty herself of all that pain, right there on the floor of his broken-down life. When the tears finally subsided into shuddering breaths, she looked up at him again. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something else now. A flicker of exhaustion, a sliver of confusion. He knew he had to ask. He had to know. "You got a name, little one?" he asked, his voice softer than he thought possible. She hesitated, her lower lip trembling. She wiped her nose on the back of her hand. They called me Sarah, she whispered. Her voice was a tiny, reedy thing, rough with disuse. Sarah, he repeated, tasting the name. It felt foreign and familiar all at once. That's a good name. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Can you tell me what happened, Sarah? How did you end up out there? Her face went funny. It closed up, the brief connection between them severed. The fear returned, sharp and immediate. She shook her head, a small violent motion. The man, she whispered, her eyes darting toward the door as if he might be standing right outside. The man with the scar. The man felt a cold dread begin to creep up his spine. What man? He worked for the big man, she said, her words coming in small fragmented bursts. In the big house on the hill. He came for the book. Mama gave it to me. She told me to run. Run and don't ever stop. She hugged her knees to her chest again, her voice dropping so low he had to lean in to hear it. He took Mama. He was yelling. I hid. Then I ran. I ran for a long time. The man's blood ran cold. The big house on the hill. There was only one. And there was only one man who owned it. A man from his own past. A man he had tried to forget. A man whose name was a curse on this whole valley. A corrupt magnate who bought and sold lives as easily as he bought and sold cattle. A man he, in his former life as a town marshal, had tried to bring to justice. A man who had cost him everything. His job, his reputation, his wife's peace of mind in her final days. The child's story was not just a tragedy, it was a message. It was a ghost from his past knocking on his door. He looked from the child's terrified face to the ledger sitting on the mantelpiece. The book, the reason. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality. This was not random. This was not a drifter. This child was a witness, a piece of evidence. And the men who had taken her mother would not stop looking for her. They would not stop until they had the ledger, and until the only person who knew of its existence was silenced. His own loss, the one he had buried under years of whiskey and solitude, came roaring back to the surface. He saw his wife, her face pale with the fever. He saw his own little girl, no older than this one, her hand limp in his. He remembered the helplessness, the rage, the hollow emptiness of a world that had taken everything from him. He had failed them. He had not been strong enough to protect them from a sickness he could not fight. But this was different. This was not a fever. This was a man with a name and a face, a man he could fight. The bitterness that had been his constant companion for a decade began to change. It curdled, twisted, and reformed itself. It was no longer the sour taste of grief and regret. It was the cold, hard certainty of rage, a purpose clean and sharp as a shard of glass cut through the fog of his apathy. Section. He had been running from his past, hiding from it in this desolate place. But the past had found him. It had sent this small, broken child to his door, not as a reminder of what he had lost, but as a chance to fight for what he could save. His jaw locked. His hands, which had trembled with uncertainty just an hour before, were now steady. He felt a sense of responsibility he had thought was dead and buried. It was a heavy weight, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of a life that mattered again. He looked at the child, really looked at her. He saw not just a victim, but a survivor. She had run. She had hidden. She had held on to that ledger through starvation and freezing cold. She had a strength in her he had not seen in himself for years. He had to be worthy of that strength. He rose to his feet and went to the fireplace. He put another log on the flames, the gesture slow and deliberate. The fire roared, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The small cabin felt less like a tomb now. It felt like a fortress. The child watched him, her eyes following his every move. The terror in them had been replaced by a deep, soul-crushing weariness. She looked like she was about to collapse. "You need to sleep," he told her, his voice firm but not unkind. "You're safe here." He pointed to a narrow cot in the corner, piled with more blankets. "You can sleep there. No one will find you." She looked at the cot, then back at him. Her small face was a mask of doubt and exhaustion. The promise of safety was a language she no longer understood, but the promise of sleep, of a moment's peace from the running and the fear, was something her small body craved. She crawled to the cot and pulled herself up onto it. She did not take her eyes off him. She sank into the blankets, pulling them up to her chin, a tiny figure lost in a sea of wool. Her dark eyes were still fixed on him, wide and questioning. He stood by the fire, feeling her gaze on him like a physical touch. He knew what she was thinking. She was wondering if he would still be there when she woke up, if this was just another temporary shelter before she was cast out into the cold again. Her eyelids began to droop. The warmth of the fire and the food in her belly were a powerful anesthetic. But she fought it. She fought to stay awake, to keep watch. Just before she finally succumbed, her lips parted, and she asked the question that had been hovering in the air between them, the question that would seal both their fates. Her voice was a bare whisper, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. "Are they going to kill me, too?" The question hit him like a fist to the gut. It was not a child's question. It was the question of someone who had already seen too much, who understood the finality of violence. The word "too" hung in the air, a testament to the mother she had lost. He walked over to the cot and knelt beside it, so his face was level with hers. He looked directly into her tired, frightened eyes. He had to give her more than just a blanket and a bowl of soup. He had to give her an anchor in the storm. He had to give her a promise. "No," he said, and his voice was raw with an emotion he could not name. It was iron, and it was fury, and it was a terrible, aching tenderness. "They are not." He reached out and for the first time initiated a touch that was not born of necessity. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. Her skin was warm now, alive. "I promise you," he said, the words feeling like a sacred vow, an oath sworn on the ashes of his old life. "I will not let them touch you. You sleep now. I'll be right here when you open your eyes." A single tear escaped from the corner of her eye and traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She gave a small, shuddering sigh, a sound of profound release. The tension that had held her small body rigid for so long finally let go. She believed him. Her eyes closed, and she slept. He stayed there for a long time, kneeling by the cot, just watching her breathe. The steady, even rhythm of it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of a life he had pulled back from the brink. It was the sound of a debt he now had to pay. Finally, he stood up. His body ached, but his mind was clear. The fog had lifted. He knew what he had to do. He walked over to the dusty cupboard. He reached past the tin plates and the half-empty sack of beans. His hand closed around the neck of a whiskey bottle, 3/4 full. It had been his only friend for 10 years. His comfort, his escape. He looked at the amber liquid. He thought of the easy numbness it offered. He thought of the oblivion. Then he looked at the sleeping child on the cot. He walked to the door, opened it just a crack, and poured the entire contents of the bottle out into the snow. The wind whipped the bitter scent away instantly. He placed the empty bottle on the floor by the door, a monument to a past he was now finished with. He closed the door and bolted it, a symbolic act. He was shutting the world out. He was locking his new purpose in. His gaze fell upon the wall above the fireplace. There, on two wooden pegs, rested his old service revolver, tucked into its worn leather holster. It was covered in a thick layer of dust. He had not touched it, had not even looked at it, since the day he had unpinned his marshal's badge and ridden out of town for the last time. It was a relic of a man he no longer was. He reached up and took it down. The weight of it in his hand was familiar. It felt right. It felt like a part of him he had cut off had just been reattached. He carried it to the table and sat down. He pulled a cleaning kit from a nearby drawer, the oil and rags exactly where he had left them a decade ago. He began to clean the weapon. His hands moved with an old, ingrained muscle memory. He dismantled it, piece by piece. He wiped away the dust of years. He oiled the mechanism, feeling the smooth, deadly perfection of the interlocking parts. Each click of the cylinder, each wipe of the oiled rag, was a step away from the man he had been and a step toward the man he had to become. He was no longer just a rancher. He was no longer a grieving husband living in the past. He was a guardian. He finished cleaning the revolver and loaded it, sliding 6 heavy cartridges into the cylinder. The sound of them clicking into place was a declaration of war. He did not put the gun back in its holster. He laid it on the table before him, within easy reach. He sat there in the quiet room, the only light coming from the warm, steady glow of the fire. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but it could not touch them. Not tonight. He looked at the sleeping child, her face peaceful in the firelight, free from fear for the first time in God knows how long. He had made her a promise on his life. He intended to keep it. He turned his gaze to the window, peering out into the swirling, impenetrable darkness. They would come for her. The man with the scar. The men who worked for the monster on the hill. They would come looking for their ledger and the little girl who carried it. They would come with their cruelty and their greed. He knew the odds. He was one man, old and out of practice, against a man with a town in his pocket and an army of hired thugs. It was impossible. It was suicide. A slow, cold smile touched his lips. It was the first time he had smiled in 10 years. Let them come. He was ready.